He didn't just ask for a divorce. He erased her. On a rain-slicked Tuesday night, Beau Thatcher, the King of Wall Street, handed his 5 months pregnant wife a single black trash bag containing the few items she'd brought into their marriage. He told her the locks were changed, her credit cards were cancelled, and the ironclad prenuptial agreement she'd signed in a haze of love meant she would get nothing. Not a dollar, not a friend, not even a photo of the life she thought was hers. Cast out onto the cold streets of New York, Hattie Thatcher had lost everything. But what Beau didn't know was that in taking everything from her, he had given her the one thing she never had, in their gilded cage, a reason to fight. And she wasn't just going to hire a lawyer. She was going to hire the one lawyer titans like him had nightmares about. This isn't a story of a breakup. It's the story of a demolition. The first year of their marriage was a masterpiece of illusion. Hattie Vance, a bright art history graduate with a kind heart and a background that was comfortable but a world away from unimaginable wealth, had met Beau Thatcher at a Sotheby's auction. He wasn't just another man in a bespoke suit. He had a gravitational pull, a way of focusing his entire attention on her, that made the crowded room disappear. He spoke of art, with passion, of business, with a predator's glee, and of her with a reverence that felt like worship. Beau was a titan of private equity, the founder of Thatcher Holdings, a name that made markets tremble. He was a self-made billionaire, a narrative he polished as brightly as the chrome on his Bugatti. He lived in a sprawling 8,000-square-foot penthouse on Park Avenue that felt less like a home and more like a modern art museum, cool, pristine, and untouchable. The views of Central Park were breathtaking, but the floor-to-ceiling windows always seemed to hold the city at a sterile distance. Their courtship was a whirlwind. Helicopter rides to the Hamptons for lunch, private viewings at the MoMA, after hours a surprise trip to Paris, where he proposed on a private yacht gliding down the Seine, the Eiffel Tower glittering in the background. Hattie, who had always been pragmatic, found herself swept away. She was in love not with the money, but with the man she thought he was, brilliant, attentive, and utterly devoted. Her friends were dazzled, her family relieved that she had found someone who seemed to adore. Adore so completely. He insisted on a prenuptial agreement. A formality, my love, he'd said, his thumb stroking her cheek. My board of directors, the investors. They need to know the company is secure. It has nothing to do with you and me. You and I are forever. He'd brought in his own lawyer, a sleek, silver-haired man named Mr. Abernathy, who explained the complex document in soothing, vague terms. Hattie's own lawyer, a small-town family friend, had advised caution, pointing out that the agreement was unusually restrictive. But Beau had looked at her with those bottomless blue eyes, hurt flickering in their depths. Do you not trust me, Ellie? And so, wanting to prove her trust, her love, and her belief that she wasn't one of those women, she signed it. The wedding was an event chronicled in Vogue, 1,000 guests at the New York Public Library, a dress by a designer she couldn't pronounce, and a 10-foot cake. She became Mrs. Hattie Thatcher, and in doing so, Hattie Vance began to disappear. The first changes were subtle. Beau loved having her host his lavish dinner parties, but he would critique her performance afterward. You were wonderful, darling, but you spent a little too much time talking to the senator's wife. Your focus should always be on the most influential person in the room. He encouraged her to quit her junior curator position at the Guggenheim. Why work for them when you can be a patron? We can build our own collection. Your collection. He framed it as a gift, an elevation of her status. In reality, it was the first step in her isolation. Her old friends, with their normal jobs and normal problems, began to feel out of place in her new life. Lunches became harder to schedule. Beau would often arrange a last-minute trip or an important event she had to attend. "They don't really understand our life, do they?" he'd say gently. "It's not their fault. It's a different world." Soon her world consisted only of him, his business associates, and the silent, ever-present household staff who moved like ghosts through their marble palace. The gilded cage was beautiful. It was filled with couture fine art and every imaginable luxury. But the door was locked from the outside. Beau's moods were the weather system of their home. When he was pleased, the sun shone brightly. When he was displeased, a frigid storm would descend, filled with cutting remarks, dismissive silences, and a psychological chill that was more terrifying than any shouting. He never raised his voice. He didn't have to. He could dismantle her confidence with a single disappointed sigh. "I thought you were smarter than that, Ellie. That dress is a bit simple for the occasion. Don't you think? You seem tired. Are you letting yourself go?" He was a master of gaslighting. If she expressed unhappiness, he would twist it into a failing on her part. "You have everything a woman could ever want. To be unhappy is frankly ungrateful. Perhaps you're just not suited for this kind of life." Then 6 months ago, Hattie found out she was pregnant. For a fleeting moment, she felt a surge of pure, unadulterated joy. A baby. A piece of her, a person to love unconditionally, someone who would be hers in this life that felt so borrowed. When she told Beau, placing the positive pregnancy test on his desk, his reaction was not what she expected. There was no tender embrace, no joyful tears. He looked at the test, then at her, and a slow, triumphant smile spread across his face. It wasn't the smile of a happy father-to-be. It was the smile of a CEO who had just closed a major deal. "A son," he said, a statement, not a question. "He will be my heir. This solidifies everything." He saw the baby not as their child, but as his legacy. From that moment, Hattie's pregnancy became another asset to be managed. He hired a team of nutritionists, doctors, and a prenatal specialist who reported directly to him. Her diet was monitored. Her exercise was scheduled. Her life was no longer her own in any respect. The pregnancy, she realized with a dawning horror, had not been a key to her freedom, but the final lock on her cage. She wasn't carrying their child. She was carrying his heir, and the vessel he believed was entirely disposable. The 5 months of her pregnancy were a slow-motion nightmare. Beau's control, once a velvet glove, was now an iron fist. The illusion of partnership was gone, replaced by the stark reality of ownership. He talked about the baby as if she were merely an incubator, a biological necessity he was forced to tolerate. "The doctor said you need to avoid all processed sugars. The chef will prepare your meals accordingly." He'd announce, not discuss. "I've arranged for prenatal yoga and a meditation coach to come to the penthouse. There is no need for you to be out in public." He vetoed all of her name suggestions. Thomas was too common. Oliver was too soft. He had already decided on Beau Thatcher Tuku, a testament not to family tradition, but to his own staggering ego. When she tried to argue, to plead for a small piece of this experience to be hers, his response was cold and swift. "Hattie, your job is to remain calm and healthy for my son. Do not introduce stress into this environment with these sentimental theatrics. Your emotional whims are a liability." The loneliness was a physical ache. Her days were empty, punctuated only by appointments he had scheduled. She would walk through the cavernous apartment, her hand on her growing belly, feeling like a ghost haunting her own life. The art on the walls, once a source of joy, now seemed to mock her with its silent, static beauty. She was just another object in Beau Thatcher's collection. The turning point, the first crack that would shatter the entire facade, came from an innocuous piece of mail. It was a thick, cream-colored envelope addressed to Beau from a law firm she didn't recognize, Blackwood and Finch. It had been accidentally placed in a small pile of personal correspondence on her vanity, instead of being whisked away to Beau's study. Her curiosity was piqued. Beau's corporate legal matters were handled by a massive firm, and his personal matters by the slick Mr. Abernathy. This was different. Her hands trembled as she debated what to do. For a year, she had been conditioned to respect Beau's privacy, which was in reality total secrecy. To open his mail was a cardinal sin. But something a flicker of the old independent Hattie Vance urged her on. With her heart pounding, she carefully steamed the envelope open over a kettle in her cavernous bathroom. The letter was from a family law attorney. It wasn't about a corporate merger or a real estate deal. It was a detailed summary of a settlement, a divorce settlement. But the names were not Hattie and Beau Thatcher. The names were Beau Thatcher and a woman named Catherine DeWitt. The documents were dated 18 months ago, just before Hattie had met him. Her blood ran cold. He had told her he'd had one long-term relationship in his 20s that had ended amicably years ago. He had painted himself as a man too dedicated to his work to have time for messy entanglements. This was not an amicable split. The settlement was brutal. It described a prenuptial agreement, identical to hers. It detailed how Miss DeWitt was to be stripped of everything, how she was to sign a non-disclosure agreement so stringent it would bankrupt her if she ever even mentioned Beau's name. It spoke of her being escorted from their shared property with only her personal effects. But the most chilling part was a small handwritten note from the lawyer stapled to the top page. It read, "Beau, a final confirmation that the PI surveillance found no evidence of infidelity. So we proceeded with the standard irreconcilable differences clause. The asset protection strategy worked flawlessly. She's gone. Congratulations on a clean exit." Hattie sank onto the cold marble floor, the letter shaking in her hand. It wasn't just that he had been married before. It was the pattern, the ruthless, systematic dismantling of a woman's life. The prenup, the isolation, the eventual disposal. He hadn't married Catherine DeWitt. He had acquired and liquidated her. And now Hattie was next. She saw it all with horrifying clarity. The prenup she'd signed in good faith was not a formality. It was a weapon waiting to be used. His isolation of her wasn't an accidental byproduct of their lifestyle. It was a deliberate strategy. He was ensuring that when the time came to cast her aside, she would have no support system, no resources, no one to turn to. Why had he married her? For a beautiful hostess, for the image of a stable family man, to impress his old money investors. And the baby. Oh God, the baby. The baby was the ultimate prize. With an heir, he had everything he needed from her. She had served her purpose. The clean exit mentioned in the note echoed in her mind. He had done this before. He was an expert at it. She was living a nightmare that another woman had already endured. How many others had there been? A cold fury, an emotion she hadn't felt in years, began to burn through her shock and fear. The passive, pleasing wife began to recede, and in her place, a terrified but determined woman began to emerge. He had made a grave miscalculation. He thought she was just another beautiful object, too dazzled by his wealth and power to see the truth. He had underestimated her. He had mistaken her kindness for weakness. She carefully resealed the envelope and placed it back where she found it. She spent the rest of the day in a state of hyper-alertness, observing him, seeing him for the first time for what he truly was, a predator. His compliments sounded like threats, his smiles like warnings. That evening she decided to test her theory. She needed to know how he would react. Over dinner, a silent, tense affair. She put down her fork and looked at him. "Beau," she began, her voice steadier than she expected. "I was thinking, after the baby is born, I'd love to go back to work, perhaps part-time, or maybe start a small art consultancy firm. Something for myself." Beau stopped chewing. He placed his knife and fork down with deliberate precision, the clink of silver on porcelain echoing in the silent room. He dabbed his lips with a napkin, his eyes never leaving hers. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. "For yourself." He repeated the word, soft and laced with ice. "You have a home. You have a staff. You will have a son. Isn't that enough?" "It's not about that," she said, pressing on. "It's about having a sense of identity, of purpose, outside of me," he finished. His face was a placid mask, but his eyes were blazing. "You stand here in a home I provided, wearing clothes I paid for, carrying my child, and you tell me it's not enough. This is exactly the kind of emotional instability I was worried about. It's detrimental to the pregnancy." "It's not instability, Beau. It's a perfectly normal desire." "It is a betrayal," he hissed, the mask finally cracking. "It shows a lack of gratitude and a profound misunderstanding of your role. Your purpose is here. Your identity is Ms. Beau Thatcher. Do you understand me?" She stared at him, her heart hammering against her ribs. She didn't respond. She just held his cold, furious gaze. In her silence, he saw not submission, but defiance. And that sealed her fate. The confrontation over her desire to work marked the beginning of the end. The final week was a masterclass in psychological warfare. Beau became icily polite, a benevolent captor who had already decided on the prisoner's execution date. He watched her every move. Conversations were stilted and superficial. The air in the penthouse was thick with unspoken threats. Hattie knew he was planning something. The letter from Blackwood and Finch was her Rosetta Stone, allowing her to translate his actions. He was preparing for another clean exit. She started making her own quiet preparations. She used the cash from her weekly household allowance, a pittance he gave her for personal items, to buy a burner phone and a prepaid debit card. She methodically went through her belongings, identifying the few things that were truly hers. Before the marriage, some well-loved books, a locket from her grandmother, a portfolio of her university art history papers. They were meager treasures in a sea of opulent nothingness. She packed them into a small tote bag she hid at the back of her closet, a pathetic little lifeboat in an ocean of his possessions. The final night came without warning. It was a Tuesday. It was raining, the water streaking down the vast windows like prison bars. Beau had been out all day for a series of meetings. He came home just after 9, his trench coat damp, his face unreadable. Hattie was in the living room, trying to read, but the words swam before her eyes. Her hand rested protectively on her belly, a constant gesture now. The baby was the only thing that felt real. He didn't greet her. He walked to the bar, poured himself a Macallan 25, and downed it in one go. He then turned to her, his eyes as cold and grey as the stormy sky outside. "Pack a bag," he said. Hattie's blood turned to ice. "What are you talking about, Bo?" "I think you heard me," he said, his voice devoid of all emotion. "You are leaving tonight." She stood up slowly, her body trembling. "You can't be serious. I'm 5 months pregnant with your child." "You are 5 months pregnant with my son," he corrected her, his voice slicing through the air. "An heir I will now have to raise alone, thanks to your deceit." "My deceit?" she whispered, her mind reeling. He walked over to his desk and picked up a slim manila folder. He tossed it onto the marble coffee table. It slid to a stop in front of her. "My security team is very thorough, Hattie. I have them check on everyone in my life. Everyone." She opened the folder with trembling hands. Inside were photographs, grainy, long-lens shots of her having coffee a week ago with a man. The man was Mark, her cousin, who had been in town for a conference. They had met for an hour at a cafe near his hotel. The photos were taken from an angle that made their hug look intimate, their conversation conspiratorial. "Who is he?" Bo demanded, his voice a low growl. "That's my cousin Mark," she said, her voice shaking with a mixture of fear and outrage. "You've met him at our wedding." "A likely story." Bo sneered the performance of the wronged husband, now in full swing. "Our prenuptial agreement, if you recall, has a rather stringent infidelity clause. Any romantic or sexual contact with another man renders the entire contract null and void on your part, and you forfeit any and all claims. My lawyer, Mr. Abernathy, assures me these photos are more than sufficient to prove your betrayal." It was a lie, a monstrous, calculated lie. He knew exactly who Mark was. This wasn't about infidelity. This was his pretext. The excuse he needed for the clean exit. He had learned from the DeWitt divorce. This time, he wouldn't just leave her with nothing, he would brand her as an adulteress on the way out. "You're lying," she said, her voice gaining a sliver of strength. "This is insane. You are fabricating this." "Am I?" he said, stepping closer, his presence overwhelming. "Who will they believe, Hattie Bo Thatcher, or a penniless, disgraced woman with a history of emotional instability? I will paint you as a gold digger who tried to trap me, then cheated when you got bored. No one will ever believe you." Tears streamed down her face, tears of anger and utter helplessness. "The baby Bo. Think about our baby." "I am," he said, his voice dropping to a chilling whisper. "I'm protecting him from a corrupting influence. I will get full custody. I will prove you are an unfit mother. You will be lucky if you ever see him." That was the moment her heart truly broke. It wasn't about the money or the penthouse or the life he was snatching away. It was the threat of taking her child. A primal fear, cold and sharp, pierced through her shock. "You won't get away with this," she choked out. He laughed, a short, ugly sound. "I already have. Your credit cards have been cancelled. Your name has been removed from all joint accounts. The household staff have been instructed not to speak to you. Mr. Abernathy has already filed the initial papers. By morning, you will be a ghost." He walked towards the foyer and returned with a single large black plastic trash bag. He threw it at her feet. "This is for your personal effects, the things you came here with. My head of security, a man named Thomas, will escort you to the service elevator. He will give you 5 minutes in the bedroom to gather your things. If you take anything that belongs to me, anything that was purchased during our marriage, I will have you arrested for theft. Do you understand?" She stared at him, this monster she had married, this complete stranger. The love she thought she had for him curdled into pure, unadulterated hatred. Numbly she walked to the bedroom, the silent security guard, Thomas, following her like a shadow. She didn't look at the priceless art or the designer clothes. She walked straight to the closet, pulled out her hidden tote bag, and then with a surge of defiance, she grabbed the few paperback books and the small locket he had allowed her. She ignored the jewelry, the couture, the empty promises that filled the room. She put her few meager possessions into the black trash bag, a symbol of her utter humiliation. 5 minutes later, she was standing in the service elevator, the cold metal pressing against her back. Thomas, a large man with dead eyes, didn't look at her. The elevator descended not to the grand lobby, but to a dingy concrete loading bay at the back of the building. The doors opened to the rain-slicked alley. The stench of garbage and damp pavement filled her nostrils. Thomas pointed towards the street. "You are no longer permitted on the premises, Mrs. Thatcher." The name felt like a final insult. She wasn't Mrs. Thatcher anymore. She was nothing. He handed her nothing. No cash, no cab fare. Just the trash bag. The heavy service door clicked shut behind her, the sound of the deadbolt sliding into place, echoing in the alley. Hattie stood there for a long moment, the cold rain soaking her thin silk blouse. She was 5 months pregnant, standing in a dark alley on the Upper East Side with a trash bag of her former life and less than $200 on a prepaid debit card. She had been erased. She looked up at the glittering penthouse, a beacon of light high above the city. He was up there in their home, probably pouring another scotch, congratulating himself on another clean exit. A sob escaped her lips, a raw, guttural sound of grief and fury. She sank to her knees on the wet pavement, the trash bag falling beside her. It was over. He had won. He had destroyed her. But as the cold seeped into her bones, another feeling began to smolder beneath the despair. It was the fire she thought he had extinguished, the rage, the injustice. He thought he had left her with nothing. But as she clutched her belly, feeling the faint flutter of life inside, she knew he was wrong. He had left her with a reason to live. He had left her with a reason to fight. He had made the biggest mistake of his life. He had turned a victim into an adversary. And she would not rest until she had taken everything from him. Not his money, but his power, his reputation, his entire world. She would find a way. She would make him pay. The first 48 hours were a blur of survival. Hattie, drenched and shivering, stumbled out of the alley and into the indifferent glare of the city. The glowing windows of Park Avenue townhouses seemed to mock her. She was invisible, a ghost haunting the edges of a world that had just violently ejected her. Her first instinct was to call her parents, but shame and Beau's threat of painting her as an unstable adulteress held her back. How could she explain this? What could they possibly do against a man like Beau Thatcher? She used her burner phone to find the nearest cheap motel, a grimy establishment near the Port Authority bus terminal that smelled of stale cigarettes and despair. The clerk eyed her designer clothes and trash bag with suspicion, but took the cash for one night. The room was a box with a lumpy bed and a flickering fluorescent light. She sat on the edge of the bed for hours, the events of the night playing over and over in her head. The shock began to recede, replaced by waves of terror. He was going to take her baby. That one thought became the focal point of her fear. She barely slept. The next day, she forced herself to eat a bagel from a street cart and found a public library. The prepaid debit card had 187,034s on it. It was her entire net worth. In the quiet, anonymous space of the library, she allowed herself to think. Crying was a luxury she couldn't afford. Panic was an enemy she had to conquer. She knew she needed a lawyer. But how? The kind of lawyer who could fight Beau would cost thousands, tens of thousands just for a retainer. She was legally destitute. Beau had designed it this way. He had built a fortress around himself, and she was on the outside with no weapons. She started her research typing "Top Divorce Lawyers NYC" into the library computer. The names that came up were all from firms that likely had Beau on their client list. Then she tried a different search: lawyers who beat powerful men. One name appeared again and again in articles from the New York Times, Forbes, and legal journals. The name was Seraphina Monroe. The articles depicted a legal legend. Seraphina wasn't just a lawyer. She was a tactician, a warrior. Her firm, Monroe and Associates, was a boutique powerhouse known for taking on impossible cases. She specialized in representing the spouses, almost always women who had been chewed up and spat out by the corporate and financial elite. She had a reputation for being brilliant, relentless, and terrifyingly expensive. Her tagline quoted in one article was, "I don't believe in fighting fair. I believe in winning." Photos showed a woman in her late 40s with sharp, intelligent eyes, severely cut black hair, and a gaze that could dissect a lie from 100 paces. She was everything Hattie needed and nothing she could afford. Desperation, however, is a powerful motivator. Hattie found the address for Monroe and Associates, a discreet but incredibly chic office in the meat-packing district. She knew she couldn't just walk in. She had one shot to get Seraphina's attention. She couldn't look like a victim. She had to look like a case. She spent the next day planning. She used $30 of her precious money to buy a simple, professional-looking second-hand black dress from a thrift store. She ironed it using the steam from the motel room's shower. She pulled her hair back into a severe, elegant bun. She composed herself, channeling every ounce of the poise and confidence that had been drilled into her during her year as Mrs. Thatcher. She had to look like she belonged in that world, even if she had been exiled from it. Her most important preparation was intellectual. She wrote down every single detail she could remember about Beau, not just the emotional abuse, but the business details she'd overheard. Names of partners' offshore accounts. He'd bragged about his obsessive secrecy around certain deals, his paranoia about audits. She remembered the name from the hidden letter, Catherine DeWitt. She wrote it all down in a clear, concise timeline. This was her ammunition. The next morning, she took the subway to the meat-packing district. She walked into the serene, minimalist lobby of Monroe and Associates. The receptionist, a coolly professional young woman, looked up. "Can I help you? I need to see Seraphina Monroe," Hattie said, her voice calm and firm, betraying none of the terror raging inside her. "Do you have an appointment?" "No," Hattie said, "but it's a matter of the utmost urgency. Please tell her that Hattie Thatcher is here. Tell her it's regarding her husband, Beau Thatcher. And tell her I have information about the Catherine DeWitt settlement." The receptionist's practiced indifference wavered for a fraction of a second at the mention of the names. She picked up the phone, her voice a low murmur. A minute later, she hung up. "Ms. Monroe is in a meeting. You can wait, but she may not be available." Hattie nodded and sat down on a sleek leather sofa. She waited. For 1 hour, then 2, then 3. The receptionist occasionally glanced at her, likely expecting her to give up. But Hattie sat perfectly still. her hands folded over her small baby bump, her expression unreadable. She was playing a high-stakes game of chicken. At 1 p.m., a door opened, and Serafina Monroe emerged. She was even more formidable in person. She was wearing a razor-sharp Armani suit, and she walked with a purpose that seemed to bend the air around her. She was talking to a junior associate, not even glancing in Hattie's direction. As she passed, Hattie stood up. "Ms. Monroe." Serafina stopped and turned. Her eyes, as sharp as obsidian shards, swept over Hattie, taking in the cheap dress, the determined face, the slight swell of her stomach. "You're Hattie Thatcher," she said. It wasn't a question. "You have 5 minutes." She led Hattie not into a grand office, but a small, stark meeting room with a glass table. "My time costs $2,500 an hour," Serafina said, sitting down. "You have wasted 3 hours of it in my lobby. This had better be good." Hattie took a deep breath. She didn't cry. She didn't plead. She laid out her story with the cold, factual precision of a legal brief. She described the marriage, the isolation, the pregnancy, and the discovery of the DeWitt letter. She recounted the final brutal night of her expulsion. And then she presented her timeline, her notes on Beau's potential financial secrets. "He believes he has made me destitute," Hattie said, her voice clear and strong. "He believes that because of the prenuptial agreement, I have no legal recourse. He threw me out with a trash bag and believes I will just disappear. He is mistaken." Serafina listened, her face an unreadable mask. She picked up Hattie's notes and scanned them. Her eyes lingered on the name Catherine DeWitt and the mentions of offshore accounts. When Hattie finished, Serafina was silent for a full minute. She tapped a long, manicured finger on the glass table. "The prenup is likely ironclad," she said, her voice crisp. "Beau Thatcher's lawyers are the best in the business. A direct assault would be financial suicide. He knows this. He's counting on it. The infidelity claim is a fabrication, but it's designed to muddy the waters and drain your resources in discovery resources you don't have." Hattie's heart sank. "However," Serafina continued, a dangerous glint in her eye, "you have given me something more valuable than a legal claim. You've given me leverage." She stood up and walked to the window, looking out over the city. "Men like Beau Thatcher have 2 weaknesses, their ego and their secrets. He believes he is untouchable. His ego is his shield, but his secrets are the cracks in his armor. The DeWitt case proves a pattern of behavior. The financial details you've recalled, they suggest he's not just ruthless in his personal life. He's probably careless in his business. Men who crave that much control always make mistakes." She turned back to Hattie. "This won't be a divorce case. A divorce case is a battle. I prefer to wage war. We won't be fighting over the scraps from his table based on your prenup. We will be coming for the table itself." "I can't pay you," Hattie whispered, the one insurmountable fact. Serafina gave a thin, wolfish smile. "Oh, I'm not worried about my fee. I'll be taking this case on contingency. A rather large contingency. Let's call it 35% of whatever we recover. And we will recover." She extended a hand. "I find men like your husband profoundly boring in their cruelty. It's a genuine pleasure to dismantle them. Do we have a deal, Mrs. Thatcher?" Hattie looked at the outstretched hand of the most feared lawyer in New York. It was a lifeline. It was a declaration of war. She put her hand in Serafina's and shook it firmly. "Yes," Hattie said, a surge of power flowing through her. "We have a deal." "Good," Serafina said, her smile widening slightly. "Now let's go get your life back." And while we're at it, let's burn his to the ground." Seraphina Monroe did not move like a lawyer. She moved like a general marshalling her forces for a blitzkrieg. Within hours of their handshake, Hattie was moved from the seedy motel to a secure, upscale corporate apartment in a discreet building in Battery Park City, the lease paid for by the firm. It was clean, anonymous, and safe. A line of credit was opened in her name, funded by the firm for living expenses. "You are now an investment, Hattie," Seraphina told her. "We protect our investments." The war room was Seraphina's office. A glass wall was converted into a whiteboard, quickly covered in a complex web of names, dates, and corporate structures. Beau Thatcher was at the center, a spider in his web. "We don't fire a shot until the cannons are in place," Seraphina instructed her team of hungry young associates and a grizzled, coffee-addicted forensic accountant named Sal. "Beau thinks this is a domestic dispute. He's expecting a tearful letter from a family lawyer. He's not expecting an audit from hell." Their first move was silent and subterranean. Seraphina's team didn't file for divorce. They didn't contest the pre-enup. They started digging. The first target was Catherine DeWitt. Finding her was difficult. She had all but vanished after her divorce, her name scrubbed from public records by Beau's legal team. But Seraphina had a private investigator on retainer, a former NYPD detective named Diaz, who specialized in finding people who didn't want to be found. After a week, Diaz found her. Catherine was living a quiet, fearful life in a small town in Oregon, working as a librarian under her maiden name. Seraphina and Hattie flew to Portland. They met Catherine in a quiet park. At first, she was terrified, the NDA she'd signed looming over her like a guillotine. "I can't talk to you," she said, her hands trembling. "He'll destroy me. You don't know what he's capable of." "Oh, I think I do," Hattie said softly, her hand resting on her own belly. "He did it to you, and then he did it to me. And now I am pregnant with his child. He's going to do it again unless we stop him." Seeing Hattie, seeing her own past, reflected in another woman's eyes, seeing the pregnancy that might have been hers, broke through Catherine's fear. Seraphina calmly explained that the duress under which she signed the NDA, combined with Beau's potential fraudulent activities, could render it unenforceable. "We will protect you, Catherine. We will indemnify you against any legal action he takes." Hesitantly at first, then in a flood of cathartic release, Catherine told her story. It was identical to Hattie's, the whirlwind romance, the isolation, the control, the fabricated infidelity, the brutal expulsion. But Catherine provided a crucial piece of the puzzle. "He had a partner in his first big fund," she explained. "A man named Marcus Thorne. They were brilliant together. But Beau cut him out right before the fund matured using some legal loophole to dilute his shares to nothing. Marcus threatened to sue, said Beau was cooking the books. Beau paid him a small settlement to go away. But I know Marcus got screwed. Beau was terrified of him." Marcus Thorne. The name went up on the whiteboard. While Diaz looked for Marcus Thorne, Sal, the forensic accountant, began his deep dive. Using the scraps of information Hattie had provided, he started tracing the flow of money from Thatcher Holdings. It was a labyrinth of shell corporations, offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands and Liechtenstein, and convoluted transactions designed to obscure and conceal. "This isn't just aggressive accounting," Sal said, after 2 weeks of sleepless nights pointing to a complex diagram on the board. "This is straight-up fraud. He's using new investor money to pay inflated returns to his initial investors to keep the illusion of success going. It's a classic Ponzi scheme, just dressed up in a private equity suit." He's been hiding massive losses in a real estate development project by funneling money through these offshore entities. If one of his major investors ever decides to pull out, the whole house of cards will collapse. This was the bombshell. This was the weapon of mass destruction. It was no longer about divorce court. This was a federal crime. Beau, meanwhile, was getting impatient. He had heard nothing from Hattie. His lawyers had sent perfunctory letters to her parents' home, which were returned unopened. She had vanished. This was not part of his plan. He wanted her to be destitute and desperate, begging for scraps. Her silence was unnerving. He had his security team try to find her, but the corporate apartment was a ghost registered to a shell company owned by Monroe and Associates. He grew cocky. He started making public appearances with a Russian model on his arm, cementing his narrative that he was the wronged husband moving on from his unfaithful wife. He leaked stories to the tabloids about Hattie's erratic behavior and questionable friendships. Serafina watched all of this with a predator's patience. "He's overplaying his hand," she said with a grim smile. "He's creating a public record of his own arrogance. Let him." Finally, Diaz found Marcus Thorne. He was living in Florida, running a small charter fishing business, a bitter and broken man. Serafina and Hattie flew down to meet him. He was tough, cynical, and wanted nothing to do with Beau Thatcher. "That man ruined my life," he growled. "I'm not getting back in the mud with him." "He didn't just ruin your life, Mr. Thorne," Hattie said, looking him in the eye. "He's built an empire on a foundation of lies that started with you, and now he's trying to take my child." Serafina laid out their case. She showed him Sal's preliminary findings on the fraud. "We believe the evidence of the fraud he's committing now is hidden in the same offshore accounts he used to hide the money he stole from you. If you help us, we can expose him. You might not get your money back, but you will get justice. And we can structure a settlement for you out of our eventual recovery." Thorne was quiet for a long time, looking out at the ocean. "He always called me a sore loser," he said finally. "He told everyone I was incompetent. He destroyed my reputation." The thought of vindication, of seeing Beau's perfect world burn, was a powerful lure. "All right," he said, turning back to them, his eyes hard. "I'm in. I have documents, records of the original fund he thought I'd destroyed. They'll prove my case. They'll establish his pattern." The final pieces were in place. They had the narrative from Catherine DeWitt. They had the financial evidence from Sal. And now they had a key witness from Beau's past who could corroborate the foundation of his fraudulent empire. Serafina Monroe sat back in her office chair. "Okay," she said, a chilling smile on her face. "The cannons are in place. It's time to fire the first shot." She picked up the phone and dialed Mr. Abernathy, Beau's lawyer. "Mr. Abernathy," she said, her voice smooth as silk. "This is Serafina Monroe. I'm representing Hattie Thatcher. I think it's time we had a conversation. Not about the divorce. Let's talk about the SEC, the Southern District of New York, and a man named Marcus Thorne." Across the city in his penthouse, Beau Thatcher's world was about to come to a screeching halt. The war had begun. The silence on the other end of the phone was more eloquent than any words. Serafina could almost hear the blood draining from Mr. Abernathy's face. Beau's carefully constructed world had just been hit by a bunker-busting bomb. Abernathy, a man used to bullying and bluster, was suddenly stammering. "I'm not sure what you're referring to." "Oh, I think you do," Serafina purred. "Let's cut the theatrics. My client, Hattie Thatcher, has been subjected to a campaign of malicious lies and has been illegally dispossessed of her marital home. But that's a sideshow. The main event is Thatcher Holdings. We have, let's call it a compelling body of evidence, including sworn testimony from Marcus Thorne and Catherine DeWitt, and a forensic analysis that paints a rather bleak picture of your client's compliance with federal securities law. We were about to package this all up for the SEC, but I thought I'd give you the professional courtesy of a call first. It was a declaration of total war. Serafina wasn't suing for divorce alimony. She was holding a financial nuke, and her finger was on the button. A meeting was scheduled for the following day at Serafina's office. It was neutral ground she controlled. Bo arrived flanked by Abernathy and a team of corporate lawyers. He was still radiating arrogance, but for the first time Hattie could see a flicker of panic in his eyes. He looked at Hattie, who was seated next to Serafina, as if she were a piece of furniture that had inexplicably started talking. He refused to address her directly, speaking only to Serafina. "What is this nonsense? My wife is clearly unstable and has filled your head with fantasies. We have an ironclad prenuptial agreement." "We're not here to discuss the prenup, Bo," Serafina said, sliding a single sheet of paper across the table. "We're here to discuss this." It was a summary of Sal's findings, a one-page roadmap to the ruin of Thatcher Holdings, highlighting the fraudulent transfers, the offshore entities, and the estimated $200 million hole in his latest fund. Bo's face went pale. Abernathy snatched the paper, and his legal team huddled, whispering frantically. "This is an outrage!" Bo blustered, his voice a little too loud. "This is slander. I'll sue you into oblivion." "You could try," Serafina said calmly. "But a lawsuit involves discovery, and I can't imagine you want us deposing your fund managers under oath, or Mr. Thorne, or handing our evidence over to the U.S. Attorney's Office. They tend to take Ponzi schemes very seriously." Hattie watched him, this man who had seemed like a god to her. For the first time she saw him as he was small, terrified, and utterly cornered. He had built his kingdom on fear, but now fear was his enemy. "What do you want?" He finally spat out the words, tasting like poison in his mouth. "My client has a few simple non-negotiable terms," Serafina said, her voice like ice. She laid them out. First, the prenuptial agreement was to be torn up. It would be replaced by a new post-nuptial settlement. Hattie would receive a one-time lump sum payment of $50 million, transferred within 24 hours. Bo scoffed. "That's absurd." "Is it?" Serafina countered. "It's a fraction of what the government will seize and the fines they'll levy when they find out you've been running a criminal enterprise. Consider it a bargain." Second, the Park Avenue penthouse was to be transferred into a trust for their unborn child, with Hattie as the sole trustee. Bo was to vacate the property immediately. Third, Bo would agree to sole legal and physical custody of the child for Hattie. He would be granted supervised visitation rights 4 times a year at Hattie's discretion. There would be no Bo Thatcher Too. The child's name would be chosen by Hattie alone. Fourth, a gag order would be imposed on him. He would never speak of Hattie or their child publicly or privately. Any violation would result in a $10 million penalty. And finally, the fabricated infidelity claim was to be publicly and formally retracted in a letter from his lawyer, stating that the allegation was made in error and based on false information. Bo stared at her, his face a mask of incandescent rage. He was being systematically dismantled, stripped of his home, his heir, his money, and his power. The architect of the clean exit was now the subject of one. "This is extortion," he yelled, slamming his hand on the table. Hattie spoke for the first time, her voice quiet but ringing with steel. "No, Bo. This is a reckoning. You tried to erase me. You threatened to take my son. You left me on the street with nothing but a trash bag. This isn't extortion. This is the price of your cruelty." He looked at her, then truly looked at her, and saw not the pliable girl he had married, but the avenging woman she had become. He saw Seraphina Monroe's cold, unwavering gaze. He saw the faces of his lawyers, who were no longer looking at him with deference, but with a new calculating fear for their own professional exposure. He saw the abyss opening up beneath him, the SEC, federal prison, the complete collapse of his name and his company. He was trapped, and he knew it. The fight went out of him, replaced by the hollow shell of defeat. "Draw up the papers," he mumbled to Abernathy, not looking at anyone. The next few days were a blur of legal activity. The settlement was signed. The $50 million appeared in an account Seraphina had set up for Hattie. The deed to the penthouse was transferred. The letter of retraction was issued. Beau Thatcher, the King of Wall Street, moved out of his palace via the service elevator, his belongings carted away in boxes. The story, as Seraphina had predicted, eventually broke. Not from them, but from within Thatcher Holdings. Once word of the massive, sudden settlement got out, nervous investors started asking questions. One of the major ones, a pension fund, demanded an audit. The House of Cards collapsed. The SEC launched a formal investigation. The U.S. Attorney's Office convened a grand jury. Marcus Thorne and other partners Beau had burned came out of the woodwork. The tabloids that had once smeared Hattie were now feasting on Beau's carcass, printing headlines like "Thatcher's Kingdom of Lies" and "Park Avenue Ponzi." He was ruined. His reputation was shattered, his company was dismantled, and he was facing years of litigation and likely prison time. He was destroyed not by a messy divorce, but by the weight of his own hubris and deceit, a weight Hattie had simply given the final push. 3 months later, Hattie stood in the vast living room of the Park Avenue penthouse. It was hers now, but it felt different. The cold, sterile art was gone, replaced by warmer, more personal pieces she had chosen. The silence was no longer oppressive. It was peaceful. She walked to the great window and looked out over Central Park, her hand on her now very prominent belly. She felt a kick, a strong, reassuring flutter of the new life growing inside her. A life she had fought for. She was no longer Hattie Vance, the naive art student, nor was she Hattie Thatcher, the billionaire's decorative wife. She was just Hattie, a mother-to-be, a survivor, a woman who had walked through fire and emerged not burned but forged. She had lost everything only to gain back the one thing that mattered herself. She had faced the monster and won not by becoming a monster herself, but by finding a strength she never knew she had. Her son would be born into freedom, his future secured, his mother whole and unbowed. The king was dead. Long live the queen. In the end, Hattie's victory wasn't measured in the $50 million or the Park Avenue penthouse. It was measured in her freedom. She took the power a cruel man tried to wield against her and used it to reclaim her life and protect her child. Her story is a powerful reminder that the deepest betrayals can often ignite the fiercest strengths within us. Beau Thatcher thought he could erase her, but he only succeeded in making her unforgettable, a testament to the fact that no one, no matter how powerful, is immune to a reckoning. She didn't just win a settlement, she won back her future. If Hattie's journey from a gilded cage to absolute triumph resonated with you, please take a moment to support our channel. Hit the like button below. Share this video with someone who needs to hear a story of strength, and most importantly, subscribe for more true life dramas. Your support allows us to keep telling these incredible stories. Thank you for listening.